to be honest, there's a little more. Maria goes, Dark Knight, stay with us and be good. And the Dark Knight goes, no. And then Maria's like, come on. And then he says, maybe. And then he leaves.
Tyrion, tell him! He has to be good! I can't, Maria. He has to make that decision himself.
You see the ghost of your dead party members for some reason, as if we gave a shit about them. Then there's an outro. And so, the era of war came to an end. In time, the long and hard days would be forgotten. But people would always remember the children who saved the world. To the souls of the four, their friendship will never be forgotten. Absolute, pointless bullshit. But at least it's short. Wait, 4 friends? Shouldn't it be 3? The 4th guy not only left refusing to stay with his friends, but he was the bad guy for most of the game. Whatever. The credits roll, and I want to kill every single person listed. Top it all off, they spelled director wrong.
Wait a minute. The end? The game's over? The game's over! The game's over! Yes! 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 Yes!
Fanatic. Contractual obligations requires you to, once you've completed the Famicom version, to review not only the Japanese Famicom version of Final Fantasy II, but also the MSX version, the WonderSwan version, the PlayStation version, the PlayStation Portable version, and the Japanese cell phone version of the game.
Are you insane? It's the same goddamn crappy game, only with a few bosses added. Wait a minute. That's not in my contract.
It is now.
Screw you, man.
Afterwards, you will return to the chronological progression of the games and review the Final Fantasy Legend series.
No!
Starting with the Final Fantasy Legend,
No!
then proceeding to Final Fantasy Legend 2,
No!
and finally with Final Fantasy Legend 3.
No!
Only then will the company recognize that your obligations in the agreement have been satisfied, provided, of course, that no additional provisos are added in that time. Should you not fulfill these contractual obligations, all monetary rewards will be rescinded. Additionally, you will be fined for causing mental distress to the company.
Mental distress! No additional provisos? What the fuck does that mean?
It is a standard contractual obligation. You ought to have read the fine print.
The hell with you, I'm playing a good game next. Final Fantasy 3.
Doing so will put you in breach of contract.
I don't care, you didn't pay me anyway.
You will regret this, Fanatic. Travis out.
God damn. In its life, Final Fantasy II earned 2 monikers. One was that it was some lost epic, forgotten in the midst of time in Japan. It wasn't. The other was that elusive status of Final Fantasy games. The status of, I know this game sucks, even though I never played it. That status applies to a lot of the games. You know, Mystic Quest,
Dirge of Kerberos, Urgiz, Urgize, Arages. Sometimes it's not fair.
Well, I played it. It sucks.
And every single review I've ever seen of this game always makes excuses for it. It's an early try, it reached beyond its grasp.
And the worst one of all. Hey, what do you expect? It's the NES. They couldn't do anything better than that. Well, I have 3 words for that excuse. Final Fantasy 3. When you make excuses for shit, you get more shit in return. And that's one of the reasons the newer Final Fantasy games are so bad.
The producers and gamers assumed, just because it says Final Fantasy, that the game is an epic, and should be played no matter how lazy the story is, how ass-backward the battle system is, or whatever.
The game is shit. Don't buy it. You know, we live in an age of gaming, where they make all these bullshit gimmicky things, like the 6-axis controller. They make whole games, because if I do this, something happens in the game. That's a whole game. And they're like, oh, 6-axis controller. Me, I couldn't care less about stuff like that. The reason I stuck with Final Fantasy was because Final Fantasy was better than that. And you know, I think fans of Final Fantasy are fans because we saw in these games something that just utterly surpassed every other game that was out there. It just had better stories, better characters, better gameplay, more engrossing environments. We saw something deeper in them that made us keep fighting those same battles over and over again in those random encounters. You know, it wasn't about the gratuitous CGI,
The lazy dialogue, the incredibly stupid retcon characters, pointless death scenes put there to knee-jerk a reaction by the audience, or worse, constant references to better games.
The good ones were almost these grand epic tales. And no matter what you thought of them, these games were games that made you think. You know, after you finish a Final Fantasy game, you know, 70 or 80 hours, you've changed a little. You've experienced something very grand, you know? And there's always something grand in the stories that we remember. And sadly, you know, it's not in games now anymore. And hey, you might think I'm insane, and that's fine. Leave a comment, post a response. I'd actually want to know. I think it's something that we have to fight for, something that we have to work to get Squaresoft to make. And I wish more people were fighting for the Final Fantasy that they want to have, and not the crap that they just keep re-releasing and producing and make sequels to and remaster it and release it again and release it again and release it again. But God, this stuff can't last, can it? I mean, I want to see Final Fantasy good again. Not stuff like this. I mean, this game is like the origin of all the crappy Final Fantasy games around now. My rating, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10.
Why so high? Because there are games that are worse than this. You might think I went a little nuts there a minute ago about an 8-bit game made 20 years ago, but I firmly believe, had they not rushed this game's production as they did, Final Fantasy II might have turned out a lot better. The game is still unplayable. Its very weak storyline is undermined by the innovative gameplay. There are characters, but you'll only learn about them by reading the manual. The experience is dull. It just makes you wish you were playing something else besides falling asleep. The music is fine, but even that is totally blown away by the orchestral version. Listen to the symphonic suite. Not this.
I think you see why I swore I'd never play this game again. It always bothered me. This game had so much potential, but it remains a failed experiment. But fortunately, I get to play some better games next time, so we can start to see why I'm a Final Fantasy fanatic. And maybe we can talk about some happier subjects too.